Hello, and welcome to the In Plaintext podcast. I'm Fran, Oliva-Velez, and I'm here with Phil Bonello. Today, we're sitting down with David Minarsch, founder of Autonolas. Phil, why did we choose to record our first ever podcast with David?
We've done a lot of research on the AI crypto crossover recently, and autonomous agents or AI bots are a perfect fit for crypto. As an example, an AI bot can't create a bank account, but it can create a wallet and execute a crypto transaction. Autonolas is leading the charge in this space, building out all the necessary infrastructure for these agents to interact with blockchains. I'm excited to dig into David's vision and exactly how Autonolas enables these autonomous agents.
Sounds good. Let's dive in.
Okay, so hi, David, and thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time. If it works for you, let's just dive right in. So, do you mind giving a little bit of an intro into the OLAS network and how it works?
Yeah, of course. So OLAS is basically crypto's ocean of services. That's its ambition. What do we mean by this? We see that there's a lot of off-chain services which make crypto work effectively. You can think of oracles all the way to complex AI agents which use models to make decisions on chain, be it in DeFi or governance or other domains. Obviously, we can dive into the use cases and the exact problems, but on a high level, that is sort of what OLAS is focused on. It's like both a stack and a protocol which enables anyone to build these kind of off-chain services which are secured on-chain, taking decisions on-chain or off-chain.
Got it. Can you dive into what these what you mean by these services? I see in like a lot of your documentation talking about autonomous agents and multi-agent services. What exactly does that mean from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first thing to note is that these services on a technical level can take very different forms. So it can be made up of a single agent. So then the service equals the agent. And here an agent, I mean a software agent. So a software system that runs and has agentic behavior. Or it can be a multi-agent system that collectively implements the service. The benefit of the latter is that you can operate it as a decentralized system. So you can think of it like a sort of sovereign blockchain-like agentic system that lives somewhere off-chain and takes decisions on various chains. So that's the sort of technical high-level look, and we can kind of pick that apart as well, because obviously quite a novel thing. If we focus for a moment just on the applications, then I think it might make things very concrete very quickly. So one application which I like a lot because it's easy to understand and very concretely related to some problems in crypto is a project we started earlier this year. It's called Governator. So Governator is basically an AI agent system implemented as a service, so as a multi-agent system, which continuously watches for proposals in DAOs for which it holds tokens. So like human delegates in DAOs, it can receive delegations from other token holders, and then it can vote on behalf of those token holders. And now, instead of there being a human reading a proposal and then making a considered choice, here you have effectively a software system using large language models, another type of software, and AI models to effectively ultimately arrive at a choice for a given proposal, and then also autonomously execute this. So this is a very concrete benefit for the delegates because they can effectively delegate their choice to a system which has rules inscribed in code effectively for voting in DAOs in which they might not otherwise vote in.
And so with a multi-agent system like this, I've heard you describe multi-agent systems like, the Bitcoin network is sort of a multi-agent system in that, each miner is they have their own intentions, right? But in everyone trying to fulfill their own intentions, they're actually creating kind of useful work for the network and securing the network. What are the different goals in a multi-agent system like Governator? Do each of these agents have certain parameters to fulfill, or like how do each one of those systems in the network, how are they created?
Yeah, it's a great question. So multi-agent system is a very, very broad term. And what we have in the service architecture is that, again, I wish it was simple, but we'll try to explain it as simple as possible. We effectively have, in most cases, a situation where each agent in the service is identical. So a bit like you mentioned Bitcoin, in a blockchain network, the nodes are identical in terms of code, and then they basically replicate work and basically check each other, etc. Here, it's similar with the Governator. So you have each agent in the system doing effectively the same work. Now, the complexity here is that when you introduce certain types of AI models, they might no longer be deterministic. Also, if you're interacting with the off-chain world, it might no longer be deterministic. So even though all the agents are identical in this case, they have to come to consensus about, for instance, the proposal they're reading, the decision they're making on it, the data which goes into this whole process, not just the proposal, but extraneous data like the number of tokens they have and things like that. So in this example, we have a multi-agent system of effectively identical agents with perhaps slightly different data, which jointly come to a conclusion and then reach a decision initially off-chain, which they then take on-chain by a transaction, which they collectively sign. Now, the stack itself actually is more general than that. So you can also implement applications where each of the agent in the service implements different type of decision rules or models and so on. But yeah, let's keep it simple.
Got it. That makes sense.
Maybe on that, just continuing down that road, I think something that users often want to know is, how you differentiate between the on-chain and the off-chain parts of the system. And in particular, maybe it would be interesting to hear how the agents interact with sort of the off-chain world.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So in a way, the moment where a service consists of multiple agents, what they actually internally doing in the service is they're building a chain, because under the hood, we use a consensus gadget. Right now, we're using Tendermint. So in a way, you could say almost as like an internal chain, but that is transitory. So we use that chain mostly for the state machine aspect, so that we can synchronize state across the agents, and it gets pruned very heavily. So the relevant state, so to speak, whenever there's anything like in terms of assets or some worldview which they want to persist, the agent systems, the services would take external services to reference those assets on, or move those assets on, or save those on. So in Web3, that tends to be blockchain. So the key example is here, a service has a multisig on Ethereum, it has a bunch of coins in it, and then it maybe moves them into another DeFi protocol or bridges them to another chain. In the case of the Governator, right, it's the voting decisions which are taken on chain. It could also use something like Arweave to persist larger blobs of data if it wanted to, and it can use arbitrary APIs, because the benefit of it being a system which doesn't run on-chain, and we'll come back to this differentiation, is that it can call arbitrary APIs. So why can it do that on a conceptual level? So if you think about a smart contract, the reason why, let's say, an Ethereum smart contract can't just call an API is that this would break the architecture, because effectively you cannot guarantee that there's a deterministic response for each of the nodes executing this. So this could be because of time or the API being down or whatever. Another thing which a smart contract can't do is schedule something in advance, right? So it's basically impossible to implement that properly, and that's because, let's imagine for a moment we would allow that, then all sorts of smart contracts can schedule for some point in the future. Now you have a race condition where everyone wants to schedule at the same time potentially, and then this block can never be executed. So how does this kind of off-chain system with its mini chain get around this? Well, it's application specific, right? So there is no, in the sense, users who are constantly sending transaction to this chain. It's an autonomous system, which itself is effectively a user of another blockchain. And so that's why we prefer to call them off-chain systems, because from a practical perspective, you would think of them as off-chain. It's not like a state which is relevant to like some third party who's going to write transaction to that application. And actually, maybe let me just segue from that just to one point, which is like a sort of key point we believe in the OLAS ecosystem, which is that these off-chain services, and in particular when they are AI agents, they are almost like daily active users for chains and protocols.
Got it. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think a natural next question to get into is, you started talking a little bit about the stack there. It might be worthwhile discussing, the service owners versus operators versus agents and how that relationship works, because it sounds like the agents really live on this mini chain, as you call it, right? Because they are sort of collectively owned or operated by the operators. So that seems to be a really big distinction of OLAS versus a lot of other services, which aren't necessarily fully autonomous or decentralized.
Yeah, so correct. So we have like these key roles which appear. So there's the service owner, which is the entity controlling on-chain the service representation. So that is the multisig and sort of the metadata of the service, the code it implements, etc. Then you have the operators who are operating these off-chain nodes, which make up the service. And then you have developers and users, right? So developers are the ones who are kind of creating this, and the users are the actual beneficiaries of the service. Now, when we talk about the service, I said before, there can be different deployment modes. So for instance, right now, we have one of the biggest kind of foci of the ecosystem is this prediction agent system, where effectively you have different types of agents. Some of them are of the multi-agent type, and some of them are of the single agent type. So in that case, where there's a single agent, the service owner and the agent operator can often be the same entity. So the trading agent which participate in this prediction market setup, they are run by community members who are both the service owner and the service operator, the agent operator. There's in this setup another service called the Mech, which provides access to various AI models. And this service is a multi-agent service. So there the separation of agent operator and service owner emerges. And that's kind of a general theme across OLAS. So OLAS does, on a very basic level, just provide like a primitive on which you can create these services. It does not say this has to be the economic model of that service and this has to be the economic model of the other service or the business model. Having said that, OLAS also has this ability on a protocol level for these services to be owned by DAOs, and therefore also the OLAS DAO itself. So a lot of the focus in the OLAS ecosystem is right now on actually making some of these services, like the Mech, protocol-owned services, where the Olas DAO is the service owner of that service. Why is that interesting? Because the Mech itself generates revenue and is a valuable, economic entity. So actually owning it as the DAO and controlling it is very beneficial for the DAO in the long run.
Interesting. And can you maybe dive into the economics a little bit? Exactly how does the Mech make money? Maybe the Mech is a good just example, even though the economics for all services are not the same. But I'm just curious in the system, typically who's paying for the service and who's maybe earning.
Yeah, so the Mech is a great one. And it's not yet a protocol and service, purely for technical reason. It takes the ecosystem some time to get things there. We can walk through this as well, but I can walk you through the economics, which are already there and it's operating. So the agent operators in the Mech basically have costs in the sense of using AI models. So these can be locally run models, in which case it's just the infrastructure cost of running them, or they can be third-party models, including OpenAI's ChatGPT, for instance. So in that case, you have the API costs of calling these models. The Mech as a whole, the service, has income, which comes from other agents requiring access to these models. Now, the whole sort of reason for the Mech to exist is that it becomes very unscalable for agents to all run their own AI models for all sorts of use cases. And so being able to outsource that to the Mech is very beneficial for the trader agents, which I mentioned earlier, because if I, as a community member today, and you can literally do this in like 10 minutes by following the quick start, if I want to run one of those traders, I just give it a bit of XDAI on Gnosis chain, and then I can run it. I don't need to configure like API keys or this and that and the other, which I would have to do if I wanted to use various AI models. That's all abstracted by these agents talking to each other and trading with each other. So the Mech basically gets paid by the trader agents who have a reason to pay it, because the trader agents participate in these markets, and when they get good predictions, are actually making returns from participating in these prediction markets. So at the end of the day, you have a Mech service which receives revenue from those agents which use it and has costs on the operator side. And basically, the surplus can then be divided by the agent operators and the service itself, the service owner itself. And so in that sense, it's a very trivial business model in this example.
Got it. That is really helpful. So it sounds like the incentive for a service owner, whether that owner is, the Olas DAO or just an individual, is that they can create something of an application, and I feel like you can think of it almost as just any kind of application built on ChatGPT or the like, but it's built on the Olas framework, and they can make it a plug and play autonomous service that interacts with the blockchain, and then they can set up the economics however they might like. And so then if it's a very useful autonomous service, thousands or millions of people use that service, and the economics might, it might be routed to the service owner, which might be an individual, or it might be routed to the Olas DAO if it's a kind of DAO owned service. Is that about right?
Yeah, and like let's zoom out again. Like why does this all make sense? So we're at the beginning here of what we see, like, I don't know how long, at least 10 years, arc where effectively we're going from agents being this niche thing. I mean, multi-agent has been around for ages, but agents being this niche thing, now getting a bit of attention because of LLMs, to what we fundamentally believe agents being like the primary thing. I mean, it's sort of the end state. Like, people will ultimately own a bunch of agents. And the question then is, will there be one entity owning all the agents and the rest are sort of subjugates, or will we all sort of democratically co-own some pieces thereof? And like Valerie and Olas, like Valerie, the dev company, Olas, the ecosystem is definitely in the latter camp. We care about creating these kind of co-ownable AI agents, off-chain autonomous systems. Now, this means like our focus as core developer in the ecosystem is about getting people from an idea to their agent ultimately as quickly as possible. And that's what the Olas stack sort of enables to some degree already, but there's still a lot of work we're doing around improving that developer flow. Because we want to enable anyone who has like a useful idea, a useful agent they want to work on their behalf to be able to realize that vision. In the process of doing this, you will find that agents, like humans, have to specialize. And so you ultimately end up with an economy of agents. And the whole point of the Olas DAO is to basically provide some of the most useful agent services the planet needs, right? And we're at the very, very beginning. So we have like picked a couple of areas where we're putting our focus, where we're creating what we call like internally like synthetic economies. So they're effectively economies which make sense, only that some of the initial demand is synthetic. So in the prediction markets, effectively everything is real, right? There's no like incentives for the traders to trade or incentives for the Mech to provide these responses from the AI models and sort of provide access to AI models. What is incentivized at the moment are these markets. So effectively, you know, we basically say, oh, let's create prediction markets for very specific questions, and then have a market of agents emerge which serve these questions. And now, actually, we have bootstrapped valuable prediction markets because the chicken egg problem, right? And this is how we think more generally about sort of evolving the agent landscape. It requires like solving these bootstrapping problems, which means ultimately, you know, people will own their useful services, but in order for that to be the case, there need to be these other agent services which are provided to them, a role for the Olas DAO, and there need to be a whole lot of development work for that to happen.
Yeah, and maybe just talking about that concept that you alluded to at the beginning of that, which is the agents becoming or moving, let's say, from a niche thing to, you know, a majority or a very large part of the ecosystem. One thing I was really struck by watching I don't know if you saw the Humane AI pin presentation, but one thing I was struck by that was how, you know, you basically all interaction between the user and any application has been completely abstracted away, because you're, you know, sort of talking to your pin and the pin is fetching, you know, interacting with an application and then getting you whatever it is that you look for. And so, you know, specifically within crypto, you know, it's been difficult maybe to connect users to applications that are sort of very intuitive. So, you know, do you think that through the use of these agents, you know, we could maybe bridge that gap between users in a much more easy way? And I know that maybe the go-to market for Autonolas initially has been, you know, sort of putting the autonomous back in decentralized autonomous organizations. But I think there's sort of a much grander vision where it could touch so many different aspects of the ecosystem from an application perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And like everything, I mean, what you were saying last about the go-to-market, I think we certainly as a DAO and also at Valerie started initially with a heavy focus on DAOs, and then we kind of learned about the pain points of actually delivering into DAOs. I mean, we have like some fantastic products we've built, for instance, for CowSwap, but like even getting these products from like, you know, the grant all the way, like even before the grant, you have to build relationships with the grant, and then kind of getting them deployed. Even it's a long process, and all the time, coming to your first point, there's sort of three big trends we see, and I think your reference to this AI pin from Humane was kind of relevant there. It's like you have the web, and you know, lots of people obviously have observed this. You have like read, write, own, and then you have basically AI, You have like rules-based learning, and then you have agentic. And then you have like UX. And basically there, I mean, I think we're moving towards an outcomes-based paradigm where we have been recently in this sort of interactive paradigm, and we sometimes get a bit lost in that. I think you can see this right now with all these kind of fast movers on ChatGPT wrappers. What they're building is like these highly interactive kind of chat interface, because basically chatbots offered, well, let me build some more chat around it. And so you get these personal assistants, which is sort of fun, but it's not really solving a problem. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm already busy typing in various interfaces all day long, right? So that's not like a 10x. That's like, like a very narrow 10x in some domain when I sometimes do some specific work, but overall it's not a 10x, and definitely not a 100x. What I think we'll see with agents, like in the ultimate state, is like really this focus on outcomes. So you have like a couple of be it companions or whatever you want to call them, who hopefully you own as much as possible, who have like intrinsic relationship with your personal data in some cases, and in some cases less. And they really generate outcomes for you. So you do not sit there and constantly have this forth and back with the system. It will generate occasionally well for you and occasionally less. And from these experiences, yes, you will feed back to it and it will learn from you. But it's going to be a bit more separate in the sense that there's more of a sort of background process which delivers these outcomes, this agent doing things for you. And that's exciting. I find it's very exciting because it I mean, certainly it's something I want for my own life. I don't want to always sit there, type into some interface and like help it along all the time. I don't think that that's great. And also I think it's exciting from a sort of, building this out perspective. I mean, for developers and people to train these kind of systems to deliver outcomes which are meaningful to them, there will be very exciting new products, even like in totally non-financial domains, social domains, health domains, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, and you talked a little bit about these systems not being owned by a single entity, and that's a lot of the value that Autonolas is bringing. I know there are some integrations with other projects. You're going multi-chain. I think right now you're built on you are integrated with Ethereum, Gnosis Chain, potentially Polygon, and potentially Solana. And then I also saw an integration with potentially BitTensor. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that multi-chain build out, as well as integrations with other part of the stack, like with BitTensor?
Yeah, for sure. So on the sort of more traditional kind of chain side, where the chain is basically there to offer smart contracts and permissionless access there. Yes, you mentioned the 4 chains where we're currently on, and like the current process is about also bringing the token there so that we can bring the staking there and that we can bring the whole kind of functionality of the protocol there. So Polygon on Solana, I think, will still happen this year, hopefully. In terms of like decentralized AI, there's many layers to the stack, and like BitTensor and the likes at the inference level, partially training. Then there's others who purely focus on training, like Jensen AI, which isn't live yet. And then there's things like CK projects who focus on like inference in like a more traditional blockchain context, right, where you make your smart contract smarter and things like that. We kind of tend to love all of them because what they do is they make these agent systems better and more capable, and there's often like extreme synergy. So one of the reasons why we are kind of trying to integrate as many of them is that it tends to create very healthy feedback loops between the developer communities, between the products, and also obviously in the case of BitTensor and other decentralized AI projects, you have like a philosophical alignment where that just makes sense. The way an agent can use BitTensor, for instance, is that to the degree that there are subnetworks which are relevant to agent application realized in OLAS, then they can obviously directly utilize them via API calls, or I think what you're referencing, what we're in the process of doing is integrate that also into Mech so that it gets abstracted and that you can sort of incorporate that into existing products.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And on that point of building out the developer ecosystem and that philosophical alignment, I know you guys have a developer academy of sorts. Can you speak to that and what the goal is of that academy?
Yeah, so Developer Academy is actually our oldest running product. It existed before the protocol, and many parts of the stack were live. And it helped us refine very early on where we wanted to take things. Then we paused it for quite some time, and it's going live again in December. I think it was just announced today. So yeah, apply if you listen to this. But basically, what the historic developer academies were about was building very specific services pre-existing of the protocol. Now that the protocol exists, there's a very clear sort of process around what the DAO wants to see in terms of new services. So the next Dev Academies have effectively two tracks. So one part is focused on developers who just want support with their own projects, which we always like to support. Coming back to what I said earlier, idea to finished agents has to go down like orders of magnitude over the next years, and or even like months. And on the other hand, we have this track which is focused on building out services which are ultimately owned by the DAO. So the DAO has this project or like proposal called AIP2, which is all around building out protocol and services for OLAS, and Dev Academy will feed into that.
Very cool. Well, I think we're coming up on time here. David, is there anything that we haven't asked you or we haven't touched on that you might like to mention?
Well, I think you asked great questions. I just want to point out again how important it is on a fundamental level that we work out how to co-own agentic AI. Because, you know, there's like all these camps emerging, like accelerationists, decelerationist, and then you have like all these figures shouting from the rooftops there. I think what's clear is that there's very little point optimizing for an outcome in which we all die. So we're always focused on the outcome where, you know, AGI, whenever it arrives, doesn't like sort of slaughter us all. And in that, the thing I'm most worried about is just like some level of, you know, fairness in the sense that you can participate in economies of the future. You know, if you're not born as the child of the AI controller, can you actually still, you know, have a meaningful life, or are you like the slave of some AI corporate or AI system? And I think the only way that's going to happen is if we work out how to co-own agentic AIs of all types. And like that's, you know, what we're really here for. And like anyone who has any aspiration in this space to also make that happen, like we'd love to talk to them and kind of join forces, because obviously Valerie alone or even OLAS alone will never manage that, but like many projects together, I think have a shot.
Yeah, that's a great message, and I think a great place to wrap up. One final thing is, what's the best place for people to reach you or to get involved with OLAS?
Yeah, if you go to olas.network, then you find all the resources there. The Discord, we are very active there. Come in there, ask questions. We also have this product called Contribute, which we're increasingly using for DAO coordination. So if you come to the Discord soon, you might find that you're being redirected to Contribute, which we're building out for this purpose. But yeah, looking forward to see you there.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for taking the time, David.
Great talking to you, David.
Yeah, thanks for the time as well.
This content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon as financial, legal, or tax advice. Prior to making any investment decision, you should consult with professional financial, legal, and tax advisors to determine the appropriateness of the risks associated with such an investment. No assurance can be given that the objectives of a particular investment will be achieved or that an investor will receive a return of all or part of his or her investment. All investments involve the risk of loss, including the loss of principal. In no event shall Plaintext Capital Management LLC, Plaintext, or any of its affiliates be responsible or liable for the correctness of any material discussed herein or for any damage or lost opportunities resulting from the reliance upon such material. References in this podcast to any specific securities or digital assets are for illustrative purposes only and do not constitute an investment recommendation or offer to provide investment advisory services. Furthermore, this content is not directed at nor intended for use by any investors or prospective investors. Plaintext and/or its clients may maintain positions discussed on this podcast. Certain information discussed or presented in this podcast may have been obtained from third-party sources. While taken from sources believed to be reliable, Plaintext has not independently verified such information and makes no representations about the enduring accuracy of the information or its appropriateness for a given situation. Any projections, estimates, forecasts, targets, prospects, and/or opinions expressed during this podcast are subject to change without notice and may differ or be contrary to opinions expressed by others.